Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Maura Cotter with the Buffalo Niagara Partnership, and I'm happy to welcome you all to Creating Wellness in the Workplace with Daemen College's Professor Whitney Mendel. I want to start today, next slide please, by thanking our BN360 sponsors for making our program possible. Our title sponsor is Daemen College, our platinum sponsor is Alliance Advisory Group, our gold sponsors are Dale Carnegie and Douglas Development, and our silver sponsors are Independent Health and Serendipity Labs. Next slide, please. Next, we have some upcoming Dnp events that we'd like to bring to your attention. So the last session of our Diversity and Inclusion virtual learning series is coming up on December 1st. This has been an incredible series, so you don't want to miss the final session focused on allyship. Then we also have a Maximize Your Membership event on December 8th and a cybersecurity speaker series coming up on December 9th. So all of these events are virtual. Tickets are available now. You can visit thepartnership.org for more information and to see our full event calendar. This is continually updated, and we will also be posting more BN360 events as we look ahead toward 2022. Next slide, please. And we also have a virtual D&I Academy coming up in the new year. This is a 4-part academy taking place in February and March of 2022. The Academy is designed to help you create actionable diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies in your workplace. So we hope that you will join us. You can apply through thepartnership.org and reach out to us if you have any questions. And next slide, please. All right, and now to get things started, I want to introduce today's presenter. This is Professor Whitney E. Mendel from Daemen College, and she is going to walk us through today creating wellness in the workplace. Thank you, Professor.
Thanks so much for having me. Good morning, everybody. Bright and early on Zoom. I'm happy to be with you all. Happy it's Friday. Happy that the leaves are still beautiful and colorful on my way to work this morning. So we have a couple things this morning that I'd like to get through. Although I'm a professor, I really don't like talking at people. So the more you'd like to engage through chat or chime in, it's certainly welcome and very much encouraged. I wanted to give you a little bit of an idea of what you're in for. Informed consent's important in my opinion. So a couple of things that we're going to do is look at the concepts of wellness and workplace culture. I'm taking this in a slightly different turn than might be expected by looking at wellness and workplace culture through a trauma-informed lens. Something some of you might be familiar with, some not so much, but I'll start with the basics. And then we're going to explore ways we can promote a culture of wellness within our own workplace, little and big ways. A little bit about the process. There'll be invitations next and at the end to breathe and kind of notice. We often run in from space to space and start our days without checking in with ourselves. So there's invitations to do so. Certainly don't have to. Opportunities to self-reflect about where you're already doing some of this work in creating a culture of wellness. And then hopefully we have time and space to talk to each other in breakout rooms, and certainly time for question and answer at the end. Everything's just an invitation. Engage as you need to and bow out if you need to. So a little bit about me before I get to talking a bit. I wear many hats, like most of you likely do. First and foremost, I'm a mother of twins, 19-year-old college sophomores, which I still can't wrap my brain around. I'm also a birth and end of life or mercy doula on the side of my day job. A social worker by training, a trauma-informed consultant in many aspects around Western New York, and an associate professor in the Master's of Public Health program at Daemen College. Thankfully, all this stuff doesn't happen at once. Otherwise, I probably would be underwater while trying to talk to you. But just so you know, kind of the perspective, the lens that I'm bringing with me and might help to explain why I'm leaning in with a trauma-informed perspective throughout workplace wellness ideas. So as I mentioned, just an invitation as we get started, settling into this space at 8:35 in the morning on a Friday. I don't know about you, but it's been a busy week. So just an invitation if you want to take a minute to do what we call square or box breathing, where you breathe in for a count of 4, hold your breath for a count of 4, breathe out for a count of 4, and then hold your breath again for a count of 4. I'm just going to give you a minute. I'm going to count us through 2 rounds. Feel free to participate, feel free to not. So if you're coming along, if you would just settle yourself and take a big, deep cleansing breath in through your mouth, out through your mouth, and then breathe in 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, out, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, in, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, out, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4. Breathing is something we do all the time and often don't notice. So hopefully that just helps you to tune in and notice what you're bringing with you into this space, maybe what you'd like to leave behind, or maybe do more of. So let's get started. What is wellness? And again, I'm asking these questions somewhat rhetorically, but also will be opportunities for you to chime in the chat as we move forward. Wellness has a host of different meanings, and often in the workplace has a rather limited meaning. The definition I'd like for us to play with today is from the Global Wellness Institute. And I'm happy to share these slides afterward. They're full of links for you to peruse at your leisure. The way the Global Wellness Institute defines wellness is the active pursuit of activities, choices, and lifestyles that lead to a state of holistic health. And the two parts I've underlined, I want to highlight in that wellness is a constant work in progress, right? And that we're working towards not just arriving at a particular spot, it's a lifelong process, and that we're looking at our whole selves, not just one aspect of ourselves, this holistic idea. Wellness actually has several dimensions. Having been in the workforce since I was 15, working at a dry cleaner first, and have made my way to higher ed over the course of a zillion years. Most places I've worked in have an idea of what wellness is, largely focused on physical wellness. So I'm going to start kind of in the lower left quadrant over here. Recognize the need for physical activity, diet, sleep, nutrition. So we see lots of workplaces having wellness offerings around those things, healthy food choices, opportunities for maybe walking meetings, those things. Important, absolutely. As are these other dimensions. These dimensions that I'm showing you here are just one example. These are from SAMHSA, Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration. If you Google this, you'll find 7 dimensions or 4 dimensions. This is just one we're going to play with today for a little bit. So yes, physical is important. So is intellectual, the ability to have kind of creative space to expand our own knowledge and skills, growing, opportunities for us to grow intellectually. Environmental wellness, good health by occupying pleasant, stimulating environments that support well-being. So our environment is different depending on where we are. I know some folks that are helping out today are working from home. That environment might feel different than at work. It might feel different than in other spots within your community. But do we have environments that are supporting our wellness, that are stimulating us in healthy ways? Emotional wellness. I'm always amazed that this is something that gets left off, although I do have to say that, although I don't like to thank the pandemic for anything, I think it has brought a lot of awareness to our emotional wellness and well-being and what that looks like. So in this context, emotional wellness is really talking about how effectively we're coping and how we are cultivating meaningful relationships. Financial wellness can take on a host of meanings also. I know that finances can be an awfully big stressor. It can also be an awfully big cushion, depending on where you are, or somewhere in between. And if you'll notice, all of these things kind of affect one another, right? My financial status might affect my emotional wellness, might affect my physical wellness, and on and on and on. Another aspect of wellness is social. We are very social creatures by design. We need connection to thrive, to survive, frankly. And we noticed this again during the pandemic, our need to be connected. Zoom being one way we've done it, although it's stressful and doesn't necessarily satisfy the itch, it certainly got us through a big stretch of things. And then, of course, spiritual end of things, right? Expanding our sense of purpose and meaning, and that may be a larger sense of connection, depending on what that means to each of us. It's all quite personal. And all of these things, I would argue, show up in occupational wellness. Right, we bring ourselves to work, therefore all dimensions of wellness show up in our workspaces. And the way it's defined here is personal satisfaction and enrichment derived from one's work. Satisfaction might be a stretch for us sometimes, but thinking about how our environment and the culture in our workplace helps or diminishes our sense of wellness is important for us to consider, which is what we're going to hang on for a bit today. So when we think about wellness, and this is one I'd love for you to chime in on the chat or unmute and chime in, who do you feel is responsible for our wellness or for your wellness? Any thoughts? Yourself? Lots of personal, right? Thanks for chiming in, folks. I think that we each are responsible for our own wellness in a great way. Yeah, there's an awful lot that is our responsibility. And I'd like to play with an idea a good employer would be. Thanks, Rob. We are nested individuals, right? Yes, I absolutely think that we are responsible to some degree, and we are nested in all sorts of other relationships and institutions that can extend our wellness, can also think about our wellness. This is a social ecological model. It's been used in many contexts. I use it in class on a regular basis that helps us think about, yes, our own individual responsibility. And that is so much influenced by our interpersonal connections, families, friends, social networks, and most everything is nested in organizations and social institutions or workplaces. I think of my workplace in many ways as an extended family. However functional or dysfunctional it might be, it's still an extension of family. Nested again in our community, broader community, and then nested within our own society, within our state, within our country, within the globe, and the policies and regulations that influence how much wellness is even talked about in the workplace sometimes. So when I think of who's responsible, I'd like us to think about it to be kind of a both and. Yes, it is our responsibility, and it also can be furthered and be on the priority list for other places like our workplaces. Another thing to think about when we're thinking about wellness in general is this idea of balance. We often have to, and it's also why I invite you to chime in the beginning to think about kind of where you are, tune in with your breath, notice what you're bringing with you, right? It is largely our responsibility to find time, to create time, to be able to check in with ourselves, to see what it is we need, to see where we need to lean in to create balance. Although this picture looks beautiful, I use this a lot because it reminds me of me and my twins. I was a single mom for a long stretch, so it was the three of us. Their wellness was dependent on me. And so if I was off balance, which sometimes happened, and I would feel like a pile of rocks as opposed to a beautiful precarious stack of rocks, it was, right, it makes a difference for those around us. And I would argue that's true at work. I think of my role as a professor, my wellness, how I take care of myself, how I'm treated at work, influences how I'm able to engage with my students, with my coworkers. And sometimes, right, I'm both of these things. I'm in balance and I'm out of balance. It's kind of a work in progress, right? Does anybody else associate with being either a pile of rocks or a precariously stack of rocks that other people are leaning on to? Thanks, Michelle. Hi. Right. And this can change in a day. It can change in a minute. It can change over the course of our life. Lots of different circumstances influence these things. One of the things that we're going to talk about in just a little bit is the influence of our experiences of trauma or adversity. Sometimes we have things happen to us, including what has been going on for the last 20 plus months, that knocks us off kilter, that forces us to try and have to move differently. So yes, there's internal factors, and there's also lots of external factors that influence our ability to balance, our ability to cope and pull ourselves right through. And oftentimes that requires an awful lot of folks around us. So we can't really talk about wellness in workplace if we aren't also talking about workplace culture. So a definition I'm choosing to use, there's many out there. Again, I highly encourage you all to noodle around and find one that works best for you. This is the one that resonated most with me. Workplace culture is shared values, belief systems, and attitudes, set of assumptions that people in the workplace share. This means a whole host of different things to different folks. And I think about the workplaces I've been part of, including Daemen. There are some certainly broader shared values, attitudes, and assumptions. And then within pockets of my family here at Daemen, there's even more so. So I'm curious if you wouldn't mind sharing with me, right, some of the values and beliefs, assumptions, and attitudes in your workplace. What are parts of your culture that you notice at work? If you're willing to share, you don't have to tell where you're working if you feel more comfortable. Feel free to come off mute if you'd rather share as opposed to chat. Genuine care for employees. Beautiful. Thanks, Christine. I'm looking off to the side because I have my chat over here. Sorry, folks. Flexibility. PTO time is valued. Everyone is encouraged to take time off, no matter the reason. A sense of community. Right? All of these things that you're listing, I would argue, are wonderful supports for wellness, recognizing the multifacets of our own existence and how we are able to show up fully at work. There's a movement, a solid one as well, to include everyone and to design spaces that are accessible to everyone equally. It's a process, absolutely. And measuring progress is important. Noticing progress, thanks, Paul, is really important also. My guess is, and we won't lean in there, that there's probably some assumptions or attitudes in the workplace that are less beautiful, that are less supportive. And that's true in almost every space, right? Same with families. There's some beautiful things and there's some less beautiful things. It all influences how we move. One thing that I think that is important for us to recognize, especially coming through the pandemics that we have, which we're still very much in the midst of. I'm a public health professor. The conversations are never ending, as are the efforts to help keep people safe, is recognizing the role that trauma plays in the way we each move, and then move as systems. And the definition I'm using here for trauma is one that I come back to time and time again. It's the human experience of an actual perceived threat of danger that overwhelms a person's usual coping ability. What I like about this definition is that it highlights the fact that trauma, adversity, is very subjective experience. People, right, we can't look at someone and say, that was traumatic. It's for them to define. And what might be traumatic to one person, it might also be because their coping stores are depleted. My ability to cope in the last 20 some odd months, when pandemic first hit and my kids were in their senior year of high school, I was trying to cope through an awful lot and I ran out of steam. Therefore, things were even harder to deal with. It took a lot to come back and find some sense of balance. It was recalibrating, which I'm sure a lot of you can share in your stories about. So when we're thinking about trauma in the workplace, it's not something that's brought up all too often, unless maybe you're in a social work circle. But there's lots of things to consider that I think could be really helpful. Although I don't expect all of you by any stretch of the imagination to become counselors or therapists or trauma specialists, it is something that I think is important for us to understand, that trauma is a universal experience, right? That everyone we meet, pretty much everywhere we go, has some kind of history. It's not our business necessarily to know what that history is. I would say it is our business, especially in creating a culture of wellness, to be mindful that people are moving from places where they've been hurt before. And that might help to explain and us to lean into support. So trauma-informed approach helps us, again, to understand that trauma is a universal experience, although personally felt differently. It's something that we can all relate to. And that trauma experiences, right, can influence our health and well-being across our whole lifespan and how we navigate the world around us. Another assumption of a trauma-informed approach is that we all have potential to heal. And in workplace wellness, in workplaces in general, it's, I think, beneficial for us to think about how we can create environments that are conducive to healing. No, it's not our job to get people to heal. It is our job to help prevent further trauma and to recognize that people are doing their very best in the circumstances that they have. Trauma-informed approach helps us to realize the widespread prevalence and impact of trauma. Right, we've been hearing more and more about this again, given what we have all been through and are currently going through. It helps us to recognize signs and symptoms of trauma and respond empathetically, and ideally to resist re-traumatization. That just means that we're trying to create an environment that doesn't trigger folks, that doesn't mimic environments that were really challenging. One of the things I want to spend just a minute thinking about here, because we don't have time to get into all the guts, so to speak, of what trauma can look like. It's important for us to think about how trauma in our early childhood can have influences in our adulthood. If we have been hurt or left feeling unseen or unheard, unvalued, that carries with us in how we navigate relationships everywhere, including at work. If trust has been violated, what does that look like as we move through the world at work and in relationship with others? So trauma-informed approach helps us to think about these things as we're creating a culture of wellness. It also helps us to think about how we're asking questions when we see people doing things that we might not understand. My guess is we've all been working for some time, and I'd be willing to bet my favorite arm, which is my right one, that you have had instances where somebody reacted to a situation that you just didn't understand why they were reacting the way they did, right? You said hello and they blew up. Has anybody had that happen to them? With a student, with a colleague, with a coworker? Somebody does something, you do something that seems kind of like generic, and someone has a big reaction all the time.
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Thanks for chiming in. Right. This is something that we see regularly, and we might be the person who has blown up occasionally, right? Someone says hello and we just go, ah, right? When we see this happen, because it's not an if, it's a when, we'll see it again if we haven't seen it already. A trauma-informed approach asks us to ask a different question, as opposed to looking at that person and being like, what is wrong with them? Which implies that there's something inherently wrong, right? That they're disordered, so to speak. It asks us to think about a different question, which is, I wonder what's happened to this person, right? We don't know. I have no idea what happened to you this morning or last night, earlier this week. I have no idea, and I won't know. You're not going to wear it on your sleeve necessarily, or right, have a rap sheet in front of us so that we can see what's going on. But when we ask the question, what's wrong with you? Try and say that without squishing up your face, I dare you. We engage in a way that might promote someone to feel really defensive, and for us to engage in a way that there's something wrong with this person, that they're defective in some way. If we're asking what happened, it creates opportunities for us to be empathetic. It creates opportunities for it to be curious about what's happening, and maybe not take something so personally, but to really dig in to see what's going on and where there might be support as an opportunity. Does that make sense to folks? I know this can feel kind of strange to think about, especially in the workplace, but just curious. Feel free to chime in. There's a couple of guiding principles a trauma-informed approach gives us, and I'm going to read through these and give some examples, and then I'm going to ask for you all to chime in about where you're already doing these things, because I'd be also willing to bet my favorite arm, my right one, that you're doing some of this work already. So 6 guiding principles, according to SAMHSA, again, Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Association, talks about safety, not just physical safety, which I think most workplaces are really good at because they have to be. Where are the exits? What do we do in a fire? Right, all those things, really important. The other piece of safety is emotional or psychological. How do we create an environment that is emotionally safe for people? I want to highlight that safety and comfort are not the same thing. In fact, we need to feel safe to some degree to be able to tolerate discomfort. I think about this in the classroom all the time. If I'm talking about things like trauma, if I'm talking about things like systemic oppression, those are uncomfortable things to talk about. And so we need to build safety so there's room to talk about those things in a thoughtful and careful way that's respecting what people need out of that situation. How do we do that in a workplace? Sometimes we can build safety, especially emotional safety, through trustworthiness and transparency, where decisions are made, right? The process is transparent, and we're working intentionally to build trust. When we think about people who have experienced trauma, which I'm one, and I'm assuming everybody else is also, trust is often the first thing that's violated, right? That is perpetrated against. And so those of us who are moving with that really benefit when things are clearly laid out. This is what's going to happen. This is why it's going to happen. This is what's going to happen next. And even if that changes, right, within reason, it makes a difference to be able to have somewhat of a predictor in front of you, so you're not taken by surprise. So how do we build trustworthiness and transparency in our workplaces? I know there's always room. Peer support and mutual self-help. This is so key in organizations, which we're all sitting in, or at least part of, even if we're not sitting in an office space this morning. Thinking about how we approach each other, right? Establishing supports. So we're building trust and safety and empowerment within our working groups. I think about the suite that I'm in. I wish I could introduce you to my peers. I am in an incredible corner with people who are really thoughtful and help me navigate this space all the time. So it's this idea of peer support, helping each other so that we can continue the work that we're doing. This goes hand in hand with collaboration and mutuality. When we're talking about collaboration and mutuality, we're really talking about leveling the power differences and having, as much as possible, shared decision making. Certainly there's instances of safety, like mandates that we have to follow, quarantines that we need to do that are dictated to us. And there's also lots of opportunity for shared decision making, people to come to the table, feel seen and heard, and a decision to be made collectively wherever possible, which requires not having this very disparate hierarchy. Another aspect of trauma-informed approach that I think is important in the workplace is empowerment, voice, and choice, right? Where we're validating people's skill sets, their strengths, we're building off of those, and that we are prioritizing skill and capacity building, trying to ensure that folks have what they need to be successful in the work that they're doing. All of this ties into those dimensions of wellness we were talking about, right? We have to be able to recognize, some of you mentioned, like flexibility is really important because people have all these other pieces of life that are influencing how they can perform at their job. There's dynamics within any organization where people don't feel heard, don't feel like they have a voice, or certain voices are prioritized over another. These are opportunities for us to lean in and to create an opportunity for more wellness across the board. And lastly, the sixth principle within SAMHSA's idea of trauma-informed approach is to recognize the cultural stereotypes, biases, and historical trauma that shows up in all contexts, going back to that social ecological model, all of those circles, recognizing that there are populations of people who have been hurt in different ways, that bias shows up in every space, that stereotypes play out all the time, and that there's historical trauma for African Americans or Black individuals, Indigenous peoples, right? We think about our history and how that influences trust and safety and how people feel that in the workplace. It's important for us to consider as we're trying to create a culture of wellness. So I'm going to skip to this one and ask you all to think about it for just a second. Where are you already? Because I know that you are. Where are you already recognizing and creating safety or trustworthiness or collaboration or empowerment in your workspace? What does that look like? Anybody can chime in with an example, because my guess is if you're showing up to this talk, you're probably doing it more than other people. But what does that look like to build trust at work, or safety at work, or mutual or peer support? Feel free to come off mute if it's easier than typing. In all parts of our lives, coworkers are a great help when I'm dealing with trauma. I cherish my coworkers. Thanks, Michelle. I can say that right back to you. We're completing D, E, and I as a company, right? So recognizing the gender, historical, cultural issues. Encourage collaboration among groups. Giving everyone who is part of the organization opportunities to participate and be valued, genuinely valued. There's a big difference, Paul. Thank you for pointing that out, right? My guess is you're doing some of these things in day-to-day interactions with people. I'm reading some of these comments and it makes me smile because I work with some of these folks. I know that I'm made to feel valued and seen and heard when I see people checking in. When I walk down the hall and I run into Paul and it's a, hi, how are you? How's your day? And there's an actual pause for an answer. He wants to know how I'm doing. Same thing with Michelle and everybody else that I'm working with. Right, welcoming vulnerability to ask the hard questions. Absolutely. Thank you, Lauren. From a trustworthiness standpoint, is giving people the benefit of the doubt. Absolutely, which can be hard to do sometimes. There's lots of little ways and lots of big ways we're doing this. So I want to center the fact that there are strengths already in this work, and that you might not be calling it trauma-informed workplace wellness culture by any stretch of the imagination, and that you're already thinking about these things because we're in relationship with people and it makes a difference. Another reason I want to bring up these ideas of trauma-informed approach is because we have noticed more and more, and I think it's been a much bigger part of the conversation again, since March of last year, around stress and burnout, compassion fatigue, and vicarious trauma. Most of us at work, I'm willing to bet again, we work hard because we care about what we're doing. We care about the people we work with. We care about the people that we're serving in our organization. And when we care, there are potential costs. There's, of course, potential benefits at the same time, but want to just recognize that these are topics that have gained so much more attention. Oh, see, I'm watching other people. I'm distracted by the chat. I love that people are still chiming in. My guess is you all know what stress is. I'm not going to belabor that point. I'm feeling some of it right now in the best of ways, trying to make sure I'm keeping you all awake and alert this early in the morning. But thinking about, right, burnout is a bit of a different topic. Again, something that has been highlighted in the last couple of months, which I'm thankful it's getting more attention. That means if we're aware of it, we can possibly do something about it. Burnout is simply the emotional exhaustion, cynicism, feelings of reduced accomplishment, right? I think this is something that we've all experienced or might be experiencing currently. The good news is it's temporary. It's something we can move through. If we don't address these things, if there isn't supports available to us or supports we feel safe enough engaging with, we can run into compassion fatigue, where we have this kind of deep physical and emotional exhaustion, where we have almost like a pronounced shift in how we're able to engage. We don't have much empathy left because we don't have much energy to do it. And that's not just with our clients or the people that we're serving in our organizations, but also with our loved ones, with our coworkers. Compassion fatigue, just like our dimensions of wellness, right? It affects us in every avenue of ourselves. Sometimes we also can have something depending on our work. And I do think, again, from the lived experience in the last 20 some odd months, vicarious trauma is something that's also quite real. That by witnessing, by walking along people who are struggling, by hearing about stories of trauma, we can pick up some of someone else's experiences and hold it as our own, right? This is when we lead with empathy and caring, and therefore we are to some degree vulnerable, right? Or exposed to other people's stories. And therefore we start to have a fundamental shift in our belief about the safety of the world around us because we're immersed in these really difficult settings. This might not apply to your work, and if so, I'm thankful for that. And I think that is something that we might be able to all recognize just based on the tremendous amount of loss we've faced over the last, again, 20 months and are continuing to deal with. All of these things, burnout, compassion fatigue, vicarious trauma, are experiences that are very real and very valid. And like a trauma-informed approach tells us, we're also capable of healing from them, of doing things to recover, to move differently. But we can't do so unless we're recognizing that these are some things that we might be experiencing. And then it's a conversation that is open and welcome in our places of work, right? To recognize that burnout's a problem. So what can we do about it? There's been lots of articles. I was reading a bunch from Forbes magazine, from Harvard Business, from all sorts of different spaces. There's so many articles out about burnout and the pandemics, and that burnout has taken on a new meaning. One of the things that this particular article talks about, and again, I'm happy to share this is all linked so that you can look at this on your own time. They talk about this idea of well-being and engagement paradox of 2020. Typically what we see in a workplace is that well-being and engagement move in the same direction, right? The more you're engaged, the more productive you are, the less burnout you have. And during the pandemic, what we're seeing is that these things diverge. The more we're engaged, actually, the less wellness we have, right? It's almost too much engagement without pause, without some of the supports that we're accustomed to, without some of the connection that we're accustomed to. And although I think we have moved more in that direction of repair, this is still something that we need to think about because we're going into yet another wave. So again, if you're curious about this, there's certainly lots of avenues for you to explore this outside of this space and what other people are suggesting be done in response, because trauma-informed approach is only one way to do this. When I think about this idea of engaging more and less wellness, I certainly felt this personally during the thick of things, and still feel it to a degree now, that I was out of balance. I was that pile of rocks for some time, working my way back to having some semblance of balance. So I want to point out that both of these things can be true. We can have this beautiful balance for a minute or 4 or 7 months, and then we might have moments on the other side where it just feels like all of these things are all over the place. And to think about what we can do and the little things we can do, I think are important, right? These little steps can be where we can find some of the best satisfaction in the meantime. And one thing that I think about, a place we can start to create culture of wellness in a workplace, is really all about awareness, recognizing and responding. If we are not aware of something, we tend to react when something happens, right? We're not aware, therefore we have a gut reaction. It's not something that comes through our brains to filter and say, wait, what's going on here? Let me think and pause. So when I think about awareness, I wanted to take a minute, and actually, I think we're okay on time. I'd like to put you all in breakout rooms so that you can talk with each other instead of just listening to me. When you think about awareness, right, which the definition here is the knowledge or understanding that something is happening or exists. I'm curious what practices you have that help you to be more aware, and what awareness, right, being aware, a practice of awareness might be able to offer us in a workspace. So I'm going to stop sharing for a second. I can see people. I hope people are ready to chime in. So I'm going to put you all in breakout rooms just for 4 or 5 minutes. So if you wouldn't mind talking with each other about what awareness means to you, what practices you have to be aware, or things you'd like to do, and what awareness can help us to do in a workplace, right? This knowledge that things are happening and existing, like burnout, like compassion fatigue. So let me put you all in small breakout rooms, and I will see you in about 5 minutes. Anybody willing to share out anything that they heard from someone else or that they want to report out from their groups about awareness?
Our general consensus was that there's so many things to be aware of these days, from news to school things, anywhere else that we are in our lives, and it's overwhelming at a lot.
Yes. Yeah. Understandable.
I don't want to speak for everybody in room 2, but I certainly think that we appreciated and identified the fact that this is, this level of awareness is an ongoing process. It doesn't ever really end, and it doesn't because our levels of awareness and what we're exposed to and the people that are exposed never change or never stays the same. It is always changing. So I think we kind of all contributed something that had to do with the ongoing necessity for being aware and improving those skills to be aware.
Yeah. Yeah. I thank you for that, Paul. I agree. I think it's kind of like most everything else. It's like diversity, equity, and inclusion work. You don't ever stop. It's something that we need to keep doing. We don't arrive at a place where we have, self-actualized. It's continually changing. We are changing. Everybody's changing. So I'm hoping that it was helpful just to talk with folks who wouldn't otherwise about these things. It's not a topic. We don't talk about awareness often. We're not aware of awareness in lots of respects because we're busy doing, right? So I'm going to share my screen because I have a couple little pieces I want to share with you as ideas. For little things. So awareness can be in these kind of micro, mini little things that we do. And it can also be big cultural shifts in an organization. A trauma-informed approach is really an organizational change model. It is meant to reshape how we do business, how we engage with people. And it is in the individual level of how we engage one-on-one. One thing that I wanted to play with for just a second is a little bit of language. This is something that I practice because I don't arrive anywhere. The use of but versus and. One example of this is when somebody's saying like, well, I really want to do this. And like, but I don't want to, or but I need to do this. Whenever we say the word but, generally speaking, we are negating what anybody else just said they needed. When in fact, both things can be true. You need to do this for your job, and I need to do this as well. So how do we try and find some sense of collaboration or compromise? If we're saying but, we are again kind of silencing or diminishing what somebody else is also in need of or it feels is important. So I encourage you to just try, even just for today, see how many times that you use the word but when you're talking with folks, and see if you can replace it with and. It's a joke with my students because in class I'll say, but no, and actually, and, because it's a practice to think about how 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 things can be true at the same time. Another one is how versus why. I use this, I have to remind myself to use this one most often with my lovely husband. When I don't understand something, I'm like, why? Why did you do it that way? How do you think he feels when I ask him, why did you do it that way? It's usually quite defensive and like, why wouldn't I? Right? Like it creates more of a tension as opposed to how, right? And this can be a hard one. I struggle with this personally in lots of spaces. Thank you, Dawn. I'm not alone. I appreciate that. I do this with my kids too. Like, why would you do that? Why did you do it that way? One of my favorite phrases, it's so social worky. Maybe it's not exactly how, but like, help me understand. What were you thinking? Or what was it? Why was this a priority for you? Still using why. I struggle. Do you see this? It's a practice. Playing with how and why is something I encourage you all to do. When we lead with why, I think about this with working with students. And if they get in trouble, even on campus, and we say, why did you do that? What were you thinking? It puts them in a place where they have to retell their story and explain themselves and defend, as opposed to that question of like, I wonder what's happening here, right? How did we get to this point where this was what you felt was best to do? That's more of room to lean in. This is my other one that I love, and I also use all too often, should versus I wonder. I like to say we should all over people. And it doesn't help very much, right? You know what you should do? Amy, you should do this, right? You're explaining a hard thing for me and I'm just shoulding you. As opposed to, I wonder what it'd be like if you tried this, right? Or I wonder what it would feel like if you were to do that. It helps people to wonder out loud, to be curious about a situation, rather than someone telling you something and you telling them what to do, as opposed to listening. Somebody earlier in the message, I think it was Karen, said, critical conversations, like critical listening, actually hearing people. Most people simply want to be seen and heard and valued. Playing with language, but versus and, how versus why, should versus I wonder, creates opportunities for folks to feel seen and heard and valued. It's not always perfect. It's always a practice. And it is worth the practice. Because my reality can be the same. We can coexist at the same time with two different realities at the same time. And we need to recognize that. Just because I see things one way doesn't mean it's not being perceived a different way by somebody else because of their lived experiences or their social location or what they've experienced the minute before that I haven't. So words can be a game changer. I've noticed this in lots of conversations with students, and sometimes it takes a lot of awareness on my part to sit with it and make sure that I'm listening and leaning in with words that are open-ended. Another thing, again, is asking those different questions. What is wrong with you versus what is happening to you? What is wrong with you is one I encourage you to try and drop out of your brains. And this includes with ourselves. And I'm not going to ask anybody to raise their hand or chime in unless you feel so inclined. But my guess is you've made a mistake at work and you might say to yourself, what's wrong with you? Why, Whitney, why the bleep did you just do that? Right? It doesn't give a lot of room for us to have compassion for ourselves or for other people if we're looking at them or yourself as though something is fundamentally wrong, right? When in fact, we're overwhelmed and we're doing the best we can and we make mistakes, and that is completely normal. How we navigate them is different. Do we own it? How do we repair? Absolutely. But switching our questions, both internally and externally, hopefully we can catch ourselves before it comes flying out of our faces, opens doors for communication where people can help explain what's happening and ask for the help that they need, as opposed to feeling judged by what is happening. And of course, we can go way big, which I encourage us to do, and to push on those who need to be pushed on to do it. We can revisit practices, policies, and procedures within the organization. It can be something as little as starting each meeting with a brief check-in, kind of like I tried to do here. Take a breath. Check in. Almost every meeting I'm part of in every space, including my classrooms, I ask, on a scale of 1 to 5, where are you? You don't have to tell me the story, but just so we have a moment to be aware, are we at a 2? Are we at a 5? Then I know how to engage a little bit better, and you have an awareness of where you are and what you're carrying with you. Also debriefing after difficult meetings or interactions. If we carry these things around, they often kind of grow hair and teeth and right, ooze out everywhere. If we have spaces for debriefing after difficult things or just challenging moments. I had a really hard conversation the other day and I had to take a walk and I had to call my friend just to be like, oh, I can't hold on to this for the rest of the day because then I can't work. I can't make it through. So having these a structure for debriefing where it's built into the system, it's baked into the way we move with each other, where it's expected to debrief as opposed to someone having to ask for it. It can be reviewing employee engagement or human resources supports available. What's EAP look like? What's time off look like? How easy is a process for FMLA? Those kinds of things can make a difference. creating a wellness committee that is beyond, move more and eat less, which are good things. And to think about the whole person showing up with all of our multiple dimensions all in one space. Because all this, frankly, if people are asking, like, why do we care? Businesses will care because we can be more productive humans if we actually feel supported in these ways, right? If we have at least an attempt made to lean into who we are as humans, as opposed to who we are for the benefit of the organization. We can certainly revisit company values, vision, and mission. A lot of people have been thinking more deeply about what they're doing and why they're doing it. Again, I hate to thank the pandemic for anything, and it sat us down a little bit to say, oh, wait a minute, these are the things I really value. This is really where we're going to go with it. And I've seen companies and organizations doing the same thing. Is it time to revisit so that we can better reflect who we want to be and who we are? Taking a look at onboarding processes for employees. How do we introduce ourselves as an organization? Do we have an onboarding process? Might be the first start. How do we welcome people in and let them know that they're connected to this community? And these are the ways that we care about each other in this community. Exploring promotion criteria for the same reasons. I mean, this list could go on and on and on. I wanted to plant little tiny seeds this morning for you all to think about what fits best in your space at this time. And it might be you trying to play with but versus and, or using should a little less. And it might be, maybe I can start my next meeting with a brief check-in, or giving people an opportunity to breathe, check in with their breathing. So I'm leaving you with this bigger question. I want to save room for question and answers, comments. I love it all. How can we collectively help to create a culture of wellness, which in my opinion is a culture that helps people feel seen, heard, and valued? We all have gifts that we give in these spaces. How do we make sure that folks know that their gift is valued and received and is nurtured? So that was a lot. And I want to leave room for questions, comments, ideas. Do you think this is bunk? Do you think it's worth talking about? Have you ever thought about trauma-informed anything when it came to your workplace? Anybody want to chime in? Oh.
I'll chime in real quick. When you talk about trauma, my work revolves around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so, the traumatic experiences that non-dominant cultures have, I mean, that's always on my forefront. It's interesting, Whitney, because as you were going through this, it sounds to me like a lot of inclusion. Workplace wellness, it really is centered in some of the same things that we teach about, and the same thing that studies, show from an inclusion standpoint. So I just wanted to say I noticed the correlation between the two things, and I appreciate your topic and your insights today.
Thanks, Karen. I appreciate that too. If I had more time, I always like to dovetail those two things, because we treat trauma-informed approach and DEI as separate when they are intricately woven. So thank you for highlighting that.
Yeah, call me. I love to chat.
I'd love to. Yes, let's stay in touch. It's one of the things I love about these things. Paul, you wrote in here, I think that awareness that you indicated we are overwhelmed needs to be shared responsibility to everyone in every institution and environment makes a top priority. This awareness can be fuel for improvements throughout the organization and for everyone. I do it is a matter of awareness, and I think to some degree creating safe spaces where these things can be acknowledged and not punished, right? For me to say I'm really overwhelmed and not be told that I'm not doing good enough, but that I'm overwhelmed and I need extra supports is a very different way to engage, as opposed to what's wrong with Whitney, she can't keep it together. Being like, she's hurting, something's going on, what supports can we offer? And it's not everybody's job to fix everybody by any stretch of the imagination. It's helping people to have the skills and tools and supports necessary to heal in their own time. So thanks for that, Paul. Yeah, overwhelmed as expected. Amen. Any other questions, thoughts, comments?
I have a thought stroke comment.
Okay.
So I work in a company which has a very wide generational spread. I think that's the polite way of saying young people and older people.
Yes.
And I think wellness is viewed in very different ways depending on who you talk to, which can be unfortunate when if the majority tends to be older, they may not care.
Yes.
And I work on a wellness committee, but we do the classic, healthy eating, walk more. And I like the idea of expanding into new topics, but again, there's probably a cultural shift from on high where we have to promote that. And I definitely appreciate the BN360 for offering these opportunities, because I know they do things on teaching younger people how to manage, from money to skills with managers. So I feel this is a good opportunity.
Thanks for sharing that, Rob. And you're certainly not alone. I've worked in institutions. I may or may not work in an institution where there can be different perspectives and related to life experiences. I talked to, even take it out of work, I talked to my dad about wellness, and he's like, what do you mean? Right? Like, you just show up to work, kid. And we can see that reflected in organizations all over the place. So Rob, I appreciate you raising that concern. I'm always happy to chat with you beyond this to brainstorm about what that might look like, because I'm always thinking about it myself. I think there's a chat survey if all folks are ready to sign off, to complete beforehand. And I know there might be another word or two from BNP as well. I want to thank you all for showing up at 8:30 in the morning. I hope this was useful to you, and certainly please feel free to contact me if you want to continue on a conversation. This is something that means a lot to me. And I try and practice in all spaces, and there's always room for growth. And I really love working with folks. So please do contact me. I mean it. And continue breathing, paying attention to it. It can be a game changer.
Thank you so much, Whitney. We appreciate you taking the time to be with us here today and starting our Friday off right with this important topic. I know in our breakout room, we had a great discussion about safe spaces and things like that. So if you could leave us with one thing that we could do to help create a more emotionally safe environment, a more safe space, without simply announcing this is a safe space, is there anything, is there any kind of one takeaway you might be able to give us? I know that's a hard ask.
It is, but I appreciate that. And I also appreciate you recognizing that we can't declare a safe space. It's up to, right? We can try and create that, but the individual has to tell us it's safe for them. I think the one thing that I think, although it's a challenge, to think about the way we're questioning things, right? That one shift in questioning from like what's wrong to what's happening, just opening up the opportunities to be curious about a situation as opposed to judgment can make a world of difference. And people feel that.
All right, thank you so much. And to everyone, thank you for participating. We will be sharing Whitney's resources with you. And we would just like to close by thanking our sponsors once again, Daemen College, of course. Thank you for being here today. Our platinum sponsor, Alliance Advisory Group. Our gold sponsors, Dale Carnegie and Douglas Development. Our silver sponsors, Independent Health and Serendipity Labs. And we do have a wide range of events, so we hope to see you in the future. And we'll end right on time for you all. So thank you. Enjoy the rest of your Friday and have a great weekend.